Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's presentation on Plum Curculio. So we're going to cover different aspects of Plum Curculio management, starting with a very quick overview on the 2020 and 2021 growing seasons. Then we're going to continue with a discussion on the efficacy of insecticides. That will be an important component of today's presentation. That will be followed by the description again of a monitoring system for Plum Curculio that was developed 20 years ago. And another important component will be a discussion on the what has been done in the last 10 years or so that can lead to improved Plum Curculio management. And we're going to close by another discussion by Jeremy on increasing grower adoption of IPM, in particular concerning the grafting project. So let's go now with an overview of the last two growing seasons. In 2021, maybe you observed the same situation, lower than normal levels of pest activity, not only pests, but also pollinators. It was lower than normal across New England. That includes invasive pests, the brown marmorated sting bug, the tarnished plant bug, European apple sawfly. They were very low numbers. However, Plum Curculio was causing damage as usual, and we had some outbreaks of rosy apple aphid. So this chart I will show you in a moment is going to present the average level of fruit injury by 9 different insect pests at harvest. And this is, I will present mean values across 9 commercial orchards in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Maine. And all these results concern blocks where growers were spraying against insects in a normal way. That would be like a grower standard. There was no research done in these blocks. As you can see, the most damaging pest in 2021, it was Plum Curculio. What you can see is almost a 5% average injury in the perimeter and close to 3% injury in the interior. And when you combine the injury across the entire block, it goes over 4%, which is higher than normal. The second pest, it was the early season Hemiptera, but that's a different story. So here I am comparing the levels of Plum Curculio injury in 2020 versus 2021. And this is whole block injury across 9 different orchards. Again, 6 in Massachusetts, 2 in New Hampshire, and 1 in Maine. What you can see is that for almost every orchard, the level of injury by Plum Curculio, whole block injury, it was greater in 2021. For example, orchard B, it was about 5 or 6 times higher than normal, or at least what happened in 2020. So something happened with Plum Curculio control in 2021, which may be related to lack of coverage, enough coverage, or timing. I think the most important thing is timing against, when do you spray against Plum Curculio? So this brings me to the next topic, which is the efficacy of insecticides. So it is well understood, and I think everyone does this. This is required pretty much, is that there is a need to spray the whole block at petal fall, because egg laying, female Plum Curculios start laying the eggs as soon as the fruit is 5 to 6 millimeters in diameter. And they start laying the eggs preferentially in the king fruit, which is the largest fruit in the cluster. So a petal fall spray against Plum Curculio at petal fall, covering the whole block, it would control not only Plum Curculio, but it's like a cleanup spray. This can be followed by 1 or 2 perimeter row sprays, but how many sprays? So some Massachusetts growers have been following this for many years. A full block spray at petal fall, followed by 1 or 2 petal perimeter row sprays. Well, when to spray, how to spray, perimeter versus the whole block after the petal fall spray can be influenced by what are you spraying, what materials are you using. So the performance of insecticides that are available against Plum Curculio control depends on the characteristics of these products. For example, insecticides in the class organophosphates, for example, imidan, and carbamates, one example is Sevin, active ingredient carbaryl, they work primarily by contact, as a contact poison. So they have to be in contact with the Plum Curculio to be able to kill them. But other insecticides, here is just another comment on Sevin, that I know some growers who have been using Sevin at a high rate when there is a coincidence with thinning and controlling Plum Curculio. So these growers have been using the higher rate of Sevin for thinning and to be able to control Plum Curculio, but the level of efficacy of carbaryl is kind of moderate. It's not a highly effective material, but it can help, especially when there is a coincidence with thinning and Plum Curculio activity. So Abont is also active by contact, but the efficacy is going to increase when the insects ingest the material. And just a note here is that when you go to the New England Tree Fruit Management Guide, you are no longer going to find Abont in the current formulation because the company has replaced this formulation with Abont Evo, which is an improved formulation. Let me just move this here. So that's what I can tell you about the conventional materials, in particular focusing on organophosphates and carbamates. Some safer options for non-targets can include diamides, for example, Exirel and Verdeprin. Those have been shown to be effective at controlling Plum Curculio, and they're lethal by contact, but also via ingestion. So they have to be ingested by the pest, in this case, Plum Curculio, to be able to be more effective. So Verdeprin became available for growers, fruit growers, in the summer of 2020. And the active ingredient is cyclaniliprol. You can see that in the label. It's a group 28 insecticide, and it has been labeled for many pests in many crops. I'm talking about fruits. Something interesting about diamides is that they are translaminar and systemic. And translaminar means that the material penetrates the leaf tissue and makes a reservoir of active ingredient. And that means that after some rainfall, there is still some residual effect. And these materials are broad spectrum or provide broad spectrum control. This table shows the efficacy of 8 different insecticides which are not pyrethroids, because this is something we're not recommending to spray pyrethroids against Plum Curculio because it can flare mites and you can kill natural enemies of many other pests. What you will see in this table is the efficacy rate. You can see the fruit crop that has been labeled. And you can use, of course, these materials against many other pests, but I'm focusing on Plum Curculio. On the right, what you see is the description of the EIQ value, it was developed by Cornell University about 30 years ago. So this value is going to measure the environmental impact of pesticides, and that includes farm worker, consumer safety, and ecological components. So the higher the EIQ value is going to be, the greater the negative impact. So the more toxic to non-targets, and the lower the value is going to be the safest materials. What you see is that for most of these materials, you can get excellent Plum Curculio control. In the case of Sevin, as I was saying before, it's not going to be excellent. It's going to be good to moderate. But the point here I want to make is that on top, in the top corner, right corner, you can see the environmental impact quotient is very high for imidan and Sevin, and that means that there are toxic materials for non-targets, also for humans, of course. And what you can see at the bottom of the same table is that Exirel Hectare, for example, they have very low values, which means that they're safer to non-targets, or the impact is negative impact is lower, much lower than the other two materials. This brings me to the next topic, which is when weather is unpredictable, it will be best to choose materials that provide good rain-fast properties. So if you're having rainfall by the time of petal fall, which I think has been happening recently, what can you apply that will stay longer on the fruit? So here we come back to the concept of translaminar activity. Some of the new compounds can penetrate the plant cuticle. They can form a reservoir, and that provides better residual activity despite of rainfall. So good examples include diamides and neonicotinoids. So what you can see here is that some factors that can influence the impact of rainfall are, again, spinosins that will not be relevant for Plum Curculio, but diamides and can penetrate the plant cuticle. They have translaminar activity. And neonicotinoids have the same properties, but they can also be systemic. So penetration into the plant tissue is expected to increase for these materials rainfastness. And all this information is coming from Dr. John Wise from Michigan State University. So let's just go here to the next slide. Here is something to consider. For most insecticides, a drying time is important. 2 to 6 hours of dry period is sufficient to set the compound or in the plant or on the plant. And for neonicotinoids, you need about 24 hours drying period for optimal plant penetration. So this table, what it shows is the rain fasting properties of these materials. Organophosphates is going to be very low. So you apply imidan and there is a rainfall, you can expect that it's not going to be rain fasting and it's going to have low residual activity. Carbamates, for example, 7 is going to be moderate, but when you go to the diamides, it's going to be moderate to high, and the same with neonicotinoids. It doesn't show the high, but it will have better than at least organophosphates. So what should you spray first? In this particular example, Hectare or Avant. Well, keep in mind also that because some materials have to be ingested by the insects, then it will be better to apply Avant before a neonicotinoid. Because if you do the opposite, then neonicotinoids have these anti-feeding properties. Basically, when you apply Avant that needs to be ingested, they're going to be repelled, there's not going to be enough feeding, and it may be less effective. So all these are considerations for trying to select materials which, again, they have better rain-fast properties. What I want to show you now is in 2021, we did an evaluation of Verde Pring, a diamide, and we compared the performance at the UMass Cold Spring Orchard versus Avant. It was not Avant Evo, it was Avant, still the formulation that we had before. So we compared the effectiveness of these two materials. What you see now is a Cold Spring Orchard. These 3 blocks in blue, they were sprayed with Avant. These 2 blocks in yellow on the right, they were sprayed with Verde Pring. And the block on the top left corner, it was alternate rows. So you can have a split application of Verde Pring and Avant. What you see in parentheses is the percent injury by Plum Curculio in those blocks. So you can see when you apply Avant close to the forest in this particular block on top, 2.5% injury, 0.17% in this block in the interior, 0.17 on the left in blue. In the block that had the split plot application, 1.7, 1.2, and then with Verde Pring 1.5 at the bottom and 0% injury at the top. Well, when you calculate the average of these blocks, what you can see in this chart is that on average, the blocks that were sprayed with Verde Pring received 1.2% injury, the whole block injury by Plum Curculio, which is comparable, no different from Avant. So these two materials were effective at controlling Plum Curculio. There was one grower in Rhode Island who was interested in evaluating Verde Pring. So this grower applied Verde Pring. There was no comparison. It was only that product against Plum Curculio at petal fall. And that was the crops were mostly apple, but also some peaches and pears, I think. So the level of injury recorded in the sampling that we conducted, it was 0.26%, which equals 2 or 3 apples per 1,000. So there was very low level of Plum Curculio injury, and compared to the previous year, the grower was saying that seems to be effective. So what I would like to do is to spend 5 minutes or so talking about a monitoring system that it was developed almost 20 years ago. I will talk very briefly because I have discussed it several times before. So it was around 2002 when a very attractive lure was developed for Plum Curculio. So Ron Procopy and his team at UMass, he developed a novel idea, which is using the canopy of the tree and the lure baiting the canopy to monitor for Plum Curculio activity. So here is the second paper showing that it can be used. What you see in this graph from that paper is that you can have 5 or 6 times more injury in this other baited tree, which is called trap tree, compared to any other tree in the perimeter of the same block. So this trap tree approach showed to be effective. What I think is happening is that there is still not enough extension work showing that how this can be used. So if you are monitoring for fresh egg-laying scars by Plum Curculio, you have to sample multiple trees. When you use the lure, you bait the tree, the canopy of one tree before bloom. Then when Plum Curculios start immigrating from the woods, from the forest, they are going to congregate in that particular canopy. You spray at petal fall as usual. Then after that, you are going to sample fruit only from this other baited tree. 25 fruits, those are designated fruits. They're flagged with a tape, so you can come back to the same fruits. Every time there is fresh injury, you are going to mark with a Sharpie. But here, as after the petal fall spray, every time you find one single fruit with fresh egg-laying scars, you spray the perimeter. And this is an effective, inexpensive because you are only baiting one tree. And it's a fast way to monitor for Plum Curculio. Because this system also tells you, or because the trap tree also gets sprayed at petal fall, then you know when the insecticide is losing effectiveness against Plum Curculio. Because if there is a fresh scar in that tree, for example, that tells you that Plum Curculios are active, and also tells you that the insecticide is no longer effective. So in 2004 and 2005, there were studies conducted in every state in New England and also in New York. There were collaborators from every state, and they were in Massachusetts, there were 14 blocks. The comparison was in 2004 and 5, you have the conventional approach, which is the petal fall spray to the entire block, and then the first and second cover, they also target the whole block. So that happened in every single block for the experiments. Then a different block, the same size or about the same size, had the petal fall spray to the entire block. The first cover spraying also all trees in the block. And the second cover, it was dependent on a degree day model that it was developed for Plum Curculio. So basically, at petal fall, you start accumulating degree days, base 50, and when you reach 308, it's time to stop spraying. So sometimes you can avoid the second cover depending on the accumulation of degree days. So that was the comparison. And the trap tree approach, based on research done by Ron Procopy, the petal fold spray cover the entire block, and then using this single odor baited tree, only when there was injury, they spray the perimeter. Some blocks only sprayed petal fold, because then, based on monitoring, we didn't find any injury for the subsequent weeks. So that pretty much for those growers, there were 2 or 3 blocks where they only had the petal fold spray because there was not Plum Curculio activity after that, not even the perimeter row sprayed. When it comes to the results, what you're going to see is the number of sprays against Plum Curculio. You can see 3 sprays on average in the conventional, similar across years, but the comparison is among treatments or across treatments for each year. So basically, on average, the trap tree approach saved an insecticide spray in 1 year, but not in the second year. And the injury by Plum Curculio, it was no different when you sampled the different blocks. So injury was similar, and there was one saving of 1 spray in 2004. So this is a study that was published, and what you can see is that in 2005, the amount of insecticide that was saved, or the reduction was 43% in the trap tree plots compared to blocks that had the conventional approach. And there was a reduction by 28% when you compare the trap tree plots with the degree day model plots. So that's what I can tell you about monitoring. It's effective, and it has been done for multiple years in multiple states. What I would like to do now is go to to discuss alternative management programs. How can IPM for Plum Curculio can be made more sustainable? What kind of risks it will be needed? So what Tracy Lesky started with this idea, Dr. Tracy Lesky from USDA, basically, we know that you can congregate injury by Plum Curculio on the canopies of these trees. You can kill them with insecticides. I have shown this slide many times before. Some of this fruit is going to get infested by Plum Curculio. So some of this fruit is going to get larvae inside. So when the fruit drops to the ground, then how can you kill the larvae, Plum Curculio larvae in the soil? Because the density of larvae in the soil underneath these canopies is going to be greater than any other place in the block, because there is an aggregation of injury. Using nematodes will be an effective way of controlling Plum Curculio larvae. So now we're targeting the adults in the canopy and the larvae in the soil. So this becomes a multi-stage Plum Curculio management program, which I will not discuss in detail today. So the idea that Tracy Lesky had with Ron Procopy, it was to bait specific trees, and after the petal fold spray, then you only spray those trees. And that was tested in multiple orchards. There was a 70% reduction of insecticide compared to perimeter row sprays. And there was a 93% reduction of insecticide use when you compare this approach versus the conventional, which involves 2 or 3 full block sprays of insecticide. So we know again that Plum Curculio injury is aggregated on those canopies of baited trees. And there is a potential for using nematodes just applied to those trees as opposed to the entire orchard. So we believe that there is some interest by growers on using nematodes, but we need to do more work. Well, this brings me to the next situation, which we know the Plum Curculio can be managed using lures, spraying those canopies in the baited trees, but these lures are expensive. The cost of baiting one tree is about $20. So if you're going to have 3 or 4 trees per acre, and you are spending $80 per acre on managing Plum Curculio, a single pest, well, that's a problem, because most likely you will not use it. So in short, this approach, even though it's effective and it has been tested for multiple years. It has not been adopted by anyone. So we believe that this is just not the way to go when it comes to lures. Apple maggot fly, there is a very powerful attractant, and growers are using the lure for monitoring purposes, can also be used for control, but the chances of using these lures are not very high. So then in 2018, in talking with a grower from New Hampshire, we were discussing how can we then replace the lures? How can we work with Plum Curculio and apple maggot and other pests in a way that we can reduce the use of lures, which are again expensive, some of them. So we thought, can we develop a permanent system, a cheaper way by using trap cropping? Trap cropping involves using very attractive plants that can bring the pest away, or they can pull the pest away from the cash crop. And it has been done many times in vegetable systems. So in perennial systems, in orchards, can we do it? Can we do it by grafting different branches and different cultivars? So this is what we discussed. Again, it's April 2018. A month later, Jim Krupa, which is joining the presentation, he was helping us by grafting multiple trees in Massachusetts in several blocks. Each tree gets 6 cultivars. And these 6 cultivars, based on research and also grower input, they are very attractive to Plum Curculio and apple maggot fly. Some are earlier, some are later cultivars, for example, Wickson. So even though the focus of this research is Plum Curculio and apple maggot, we are focusing, we're including European apple sawfly, tarnished plant bug, and other pests, because you don't have lures that you can use for European apple sawfly. So if we can confirm that these trees are working against multiple pests, those could become permanent monitoring sites. And if they're really attractive, they could become attract and kill sites. So the concept is kind of simple, cheap, and we believe it's grower friendly. How effective this is? Well, let me just tell you that this is a long-term project. It's going to be more than 8 years before we get the final data. Collaborators from different states, in particular New Hampshire, Jeremy, Heather and Bryant, and Anna Wallingforth, Dr. Anna Wallingforth. So what I want to show you is a table, but don't pay much attention to the details. It's just the year. What you can see is that we had 14 blocks in 3 states in 2000, that the trees were grafted in 2018 and 2019. In 2020, we didn't have any blocks grafted. 2021, we had one more grower joining the efforts. And for 2022, I think we have 4 blocks that we're going to be grafting. So we're increasing the number of blocks. Then before I go to the results, I need to tell you that in 2018 and 19, we grafted the trees. Nothing happened. The growers continued to manage the pest in the way they usually do. 2020, it was just too soon to collect any data because these branches need to grow, produce fruit, etc. So 2021, it was the first time, 3 years after we grafted, when we collected the first data. And what I want to show you is focus on Plum Curculio. I also have apple maggot results, but not for today. What you can see is an example of the block, one block in Cold Spring Orchard. The blue circles represent the 6 grafted trees in this block. And we compared injury in those 6 grafted trees versus 6 trees which are non-grafted. Well, they're grafted, but it's part of the block, the original grafting. So what you want to see is now a table, which is a chart where when I calculate the average across 9 blocks in Massachusetts, the focus is only Massachusetts. The grafted blocks, the grafted trees, when you combine the injury across the 6 cultivars, there was 20% injury on average. When you go to the stock, which is the fruit that is not the grafted branches, they also get a high level of injury by Plum Curculio. And you have in non-grafted trees in the same block, the original trees, the injury is about 5%. It's the perimeter. We're talking about the perimeter. So you can see now it's about 4 times the level of injury in grafted trees compared to non-grafted trees. So this seems to be working for Plum Curculio. And let's explore in just 3 orchards, because we're not going to have time to show you every orchard. This is Cold Spring Orchard, 1 block, where we have 4 grafted trees. These colors show you the branches across all 4 trees in the block that got injury by Plum Curculio. Red Astrachan, 70% of the fruit had injury by Plum Curculio. Wickson, 70%. Liberty, 40%. Yellow transparent, 47%. But also the stock fruit got a 40% injury. Here is a table that shows you when you combine all the grafted branches, there was 45% injury in grafted branches, 44% injury in the stock fruit, which is not the grafted branches. But in this particular block, it was surprising to see that non-grafted trees in the same block, there was 0 injury. So the injury by Plum Curculio was concentrated on those grafted trees. Niche way, you can see then, let's say, Red Astrachan, the branches were very small, no fruit, but there was 23% injury in Wickson, 20% in Liberty. And grafted trees, on average, there was 16% injury. The stock fruit got 14% injury. And again, non-grafted trees in this block got 0 injury. And that was surprising, but just positive news. 1 more block, Clarkdale. In that particular block, we have 6 grafted trees, 50% injury by Red Astrachan, 33% in Ginger Gold, 31.3% in Liberty. And the table shows that there was 20% injury on average in grafted branches and 20% in the stock fruit, which is not the grafted branches. And that was about 3 times the level of injury compared to non-grafted trees in the same block. So the last part of this presentation actually is going to be Jeremy talking about some of these results, plus the activities that we're planning for grower adoption. So Jeremy.
All right, thank you, Jaime. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Jeremy Delisle. I am with UNH Cooperative Extension, field specialist, working on our fruit and vegetable team and more in tree fruit these days. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit today kind of about the extension side of things, where we're taking the research that's happening, through the universities and on some of our research farms, through various collaborations, and taking that information and getting it out onto farms throughout the various states that we're all working in. And, it's kind of this is a classic example of extension and research and grower support all coming together, as we always hope they will, to be able to kind of push out a fairly new practice that may not have been adopted by too many growers at this point. And so that's kind of been our role as we've tried to support Jaime and others that have been doing some of this research, showing that these tactics are effective, but to this point, having relatively low adoption. And as Jaime kind of mentioned in his presentation, part of that might just be due to extension efforts and getting the word out there. So we recently just hosted a grafting workshop for commercial producers here in New Hampshire. And it was a really fun workshop. It was exciting because many of us hadn't been together in person for, almost 2 years. And so we were itching to do that anyway. But then this idea of grafting, as something that, many orchardists probably have some familiarity with, but may only do a little bit of here and there. It's kind of one of those skills that we could all generally use some brushing up on, and then to layer on top of that, this idea of multi-cultivar grafting and the benefits that we can see from that. It kind of just made sense to incorporate those two together into one workshop and really try to roll all of that out at once. So we promoted it pretty broadly, and we had almost 50 participants show up with 5 states represented. So it was really exciting. People traveled from quite a ways away to come and learn grafting and hear more about this multi-cultivar grafting technique. And there was a lot of interest there. And we really tried to target it towards commercial producers, with the thought being that, hey, we want to see more adoption of this on increased acreages throughout the Northeast. So I have to give lots of credit to Steve Wood of Poverty Lane Orchards. He was our host. This is where we held the workshop, and Steve started out really stressing the importance of cambium, and how important that is when we're considering grafting. And once you kind of learn how to identify cambium and some of the techniques through grafting to line that cambium up, then you can do all sorts of stuff with grafting and kind of master many different types of grafts. So this was our host location. So Poverty Lane Orchards is in Lebanon, New Hampshire, and they make their cider under the label of Farnham Hill Ciders. Fantastic cider. If you haven't tried it, I definitely recommend you do. Steve has this nice big new building here where they're making and storing their cider, and he had a big open space that we were able to use and get everyone in. And the whole idea of this workshop was to get people some hands-on experience with grafting, to practice this. And so I just want to reiterate that the grower support here for this project has been really critical. And I think that relationship between, a researcher like Jaime with growers, and then, extension staff like myself in the state, all coming together and listening to each other to say, here's what's needed, here's what we would like to accomplish. And this is some of the education that needs to happen to allow us to get there. I think that's what allowed us to pull the idea for this project together, as far as how can we increase education around this. So it took a team kind of to pull this together. You'll see on the left is Steve Wood. And then we have one of his farm staff here. We had 2 commercial grafters, Raul and Mary Godinez, come up from Virginia, and they do this as a business for orchardists up and down the East Coast. And they're with Countryside Farm and Nurseries. They're amazing, artists that work when you watch them graft. And watching Raul sharpen his knives and then cut scion wood, it's like a sharp knife through butter. And obviously he does it often. Mary is an excellent educator and really well spoken, and so the 2 paired really nicely together to do some really great education. And then we had our county field specialist in the county that the orchard that was hosting was located, Heather Bryant. And Dan Burns, still here, did all of our video and photography, because a big part of this project was to capture photos and video of the grafting process and actually, show folks how to do that and create a lasting resource that people could then go back to and visit. And I'll tell you more about that stuff as we go through. And then myself on the right. And Steve's wife, Lulu, took this picture, and she made us take all kinds of fun ones as we went through. And this was after we were done with all the hard work. So other partners, just want to reiterate. So grower involvement, Steve Wood, Poverty Lane Orchards, and Chuck Souther, they've both been participating with Jaime in this research for a few years now, and all sorts of other orchard-related research for many years, going back to Ron Prokopi with Steve Wood. And so their involvement was really critical to say, here's what we need to do as far as grower education. And here are some of the ways that we think Extension could partner and help us roll this information out. Steve had the connection with Raul and Mary from Virginia and coerced them into coming up and spending a few days here with us so that we could create these resources and offer the workshop. And then, of course, Jaime is leading us on the research and providing all of the information that we're then rolling out to growers. We did apply for a small grant through the New Hampshire Department of Agriculture. I don't know if other states have this type of a fund, but we have what's called our IPM fund. that is basically, it takes a percentage of the registration fees for all pesticides in New Hampshire, including things like DEET or mosquito repellent, other things like that. And a percentage of that goes into a fund that can then be utilized for various IPM projects. And this grafting project fit really nicely into that. And so we were able to get a small $5,000 grant just to get people up and get the materials needed for the workshop. So here are Raul and Mary. This is their business, Countryside Farm and Nurseries. And as I said, they're commercial grafters. They're amazing folks, and they cover a lot of acreage, and they also they're producing their own trees at this point. They do custom grafting. So it was really nice to have experts in their field come up and show their best practices to our commercial orchardists. So another neat part of this was that Steve Wood, who's a grower, he's so invested in this project that he wanted to present, and as part of the workshop. And so took it upon himself to create a presentation, in this case really focusing on cambium and the importance of cambium in grafting. And he created these PowerPoint slides showing this, and got up and gave a presentation showing some of the various grafts that he would do in his orchard. And it was just really nice to have that partnership between growers teaching other growers. And as you all know, sometimes listening to extension folks, we can talk until we're blue in the face, and sometimes it's nice just to hear it from another grower, and we understand that. And that's where that involvement from folks like Steve was so great. So this graft here is one of the grafts that Steve does at times in his orchard, the double whip and tongue graft. And then this is showing here a couple of scions, and so he would actually graft 2 scions on here. And these scions would have been collected. Typically, we would collect those in the month of March, maybe late February here in New Hampshire. And we definitely want to collect those while they're dormant, and get those into cold storage, and then we can hold them for a number of weeks, typically, before we would graft those, either doing bench grafting or grafting onto existing trees there in the orchard. So this picture is kind of showing that, and it's kind of a mock graft that Steve would do in his orchard. We're collecting these scions when they're dormant. Actually here, in New Hampshire, I know folks are kind of scurrying a little bit to go ahead and collect scion wood now, just with these warm temperatures, and not wanting them to push forward too much. So the sooner the better here. Normally we have a little bit more time, it seems like, in the month of March, but this year they've been pushed ahead a bit. So this is again showing another one of the slides that Steve put together, kind of demonstrating a cleft graft and how that would be done in the orchard. And then specific cuts like this wedge cut here that we were practicing during the workshop. And so folks really spent a lot of time practicing these cuts so that they could feel comfortable when they did go out into the orchard and do some of these grafts themselves. And then we captured a lot of photos and videos. Here's another one with Steve showing the cambium layer, where that is. The intent was to put these resources up and have them be a lasting resource that people can go back to and either brush up or teach other folks about how you can graft and how easy this is once you master just a few techniques. This is Raul showing how to make some of these long sloping cuts that a lot of us struggle with. Big part of it was having a very sharp knife, and he demonstrated how important that was. And then they showed some techniques, which we have video of that'll be available, as far as how to make those long sloping cuts and why they're so important, to make sure that we get good alignment and a nice flat surface to join those grafts. So our main goal here was to get people actually wielding knives and getting their hands on some scion wood and just making a bunch of cuts. We believe that, so many times we can educate and teach and talk about a practice, but then making time within our educational programming for people to actually do it and practice it, so many times just yields, much better results. And so we built time in to be able to do that. We encouraged everybody to bring their own tools, bring their own grafting knives, bring what they had. And then we supplied a bunch as well. Mary and Raul had a bunch. I had a bunch of grafting knives. We had various tools there on display to show, and kind of walked folks through what all those tools were and the various sealants, all the different ways that you can secure a graft. And, the commercial grafters talked about their preferences as far as what materials they like to use, what works best for them, and what they would recommend. All right, and so here you can see it was really great as far as interaction. We had growers talking to each other. Here in the top left, this is Harry Ricker, who's also been involved with this project, and I think he's on the call today. But Harry came down with one of his staff that does a lot of the grafting, and Harry's been involved with Jaime with this project for a number of years, and has partnered with Steve on a few aspects of this project. One of them in particular is planting some additional plum trees as an additional attractant in their orchards. So they're very invested in looking for ways to make this trap tree approach even more effective. But you can see here, this was a group all from Maine that came down. And actually everyone at that table is now going to be participating in this work, partnering with us and with Jaime. They're going to start doing some grafting this year. This is Matt and Ellen from McDougall Orchard. And I believe Scott here is also a main grower, and they're all going to participate and start grafting some trees this spring. So we're working on identifying scion wood and figuring out a plan to get that to them pretty soon in the next few weeks. And Jim Krupa, who I think is also on the call, is a big part of this. He's also a grafting expert, working with Jaime down at UMass. And Jim has been a big supporter in actually doing some of this grafting on orchards, getting these projects started, getting these trees grafted so that we can go ahead and get those grafts growing and start to see the benefits once they start to produce fruit. Here you'll see, this is Steve Wood here. And then this is Raul Godinez, the grafter, and doing some one-on-one instruction with another main grower here. All right, and so as you all know, if you've been to any of our programs, evaluation is a big part of what we do to see, did we have an impact? Are folks interested in the practices we're talking about? Are they going to actually adopt them and put them to use on their farms? So it was really nice to see that, people did learn, or at least they said they learned. I'm pretty sure everybody did. 100% of the participants reported, they increased their knowledge and that they were more confident now in being able to go out into their own orchards and successfully graft some of their own trees. And then about half, 47%, indicated that they would consider adopting the practice of multi-cultivar grafting. Some were still on the fence, so maybe they need to see a few more years of the work and the results from monitoring there on these farms. But we're headed in the right direction. And the goal was to actually come out of this workshop with a handful of new farms that said that they want to participate this year. And so we were successful in that. So kind of as I was saying, I encourage folks to come up and talk to me and let me know if they want to participate, and we can talk about how they can do that. And so we ended up with 4 farms, 3 of them out of Maine, which is pretty exciting, and an additional one here in New Hampshire and a potential in Massachusetts that all said they want to participate. Yesterday, Jaime and Jim and I met with them through a Zoom meeting and went over some of the details and looked at their aerial views of their orchards, and are starting to get an idea for the number of trees that would be required to be grafted based on the acreage that they want to enroll in the program. And so it's kind of exciting. We're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of potentially up to another 25 acres or so of orchard that could be enrolled in the program as of this year. So we're pretty excited about that. So I just want to thank again some of our partners, the farms especially that have participated and pushed this forward, the commercial grafters that came up, of course, Jaime and all of the work that he's done to promote this work and educate all of us in extension so that we can in turn work with the orchardist and make sure that they're informed about these new practices. And then our UNH folks, Heather Bryant and Anna Wallingford is our IPM state specialist, who's always lending support, answering questions related to these types of projects. Jim Krupa, and also Dan Burnstill, who just recently left Extension, but he's responsible for a lot of the photos that we have and a lot of the video that we're creating and just about to publish to YouTube. From what I understand, our marketing and communications person tells me that by close of business today, we should have several videos about grafting and all coming out of our grafting workshop posted to the UNH Food and Ag YouTube channel. So I'll make sure that folks get access to that so that they can view it if you would like to. All right, and it's about a 7-minute video. And so that will get us pretty close to the end of our time here, but probably will also allow a little bit more time for a few additional questions if folks have them.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Delisle with UNH Cooperative Extension. I'm a field specialist in Merrimack County on our fruit and vegetable team. And I want to welcome you to this informational series about our grafting workshop for commercial producers that we're doing here at Poverty Lane Orchards in Lebanon. All of this is made possible through a collaborative effort, which includes representatives from UMass Cooperative Extension, the New Hampshire Fruit Growers Association, the New Hampshire Department of Ag Markets and Food, UNH Cooperative Extension, our host farm Poverty Lane Orchards here in Lebanon, as well as the commercial grafters that we have here in New Hampshire this week, Raul and Mary Godinez. And so this is designed so that you can go back, revisit these videos and photos and the other resources that we've provided so that you can brush up on the information that we've presented. And then if you have additional questions or you're interested in getting more involved in this project, then you can reach out to any of us with UNH Cooperative Extension or our partner farms here, UMass Extension, to follow up and get more information about how you can best participate. So I hope you enjoy the series, and thank you very much for watching.
Thank you. Thanks all. All right, I'll meet anybody over.
The most important aspect of grafting is to ensure that the cambium of your rootstock and the scion line up properly. The cambium is the thin layer between the wood and the bark. And this is the cambium on a smaller piece of scion wood. The most common type of graft is called a whip and tongue graft. Make identical long sloping cuts or whips and back cuts or tongues on your rootstock and scion. For a more detailed description of how to make the proper whip cut, watch the video of Mary's tutorial here. Try to get cuts as close to identical as possible to form a tight seal when interlocked together. Make 2 cuts, forming a wedge on your scion. Make an angular cut into the side of your rootstock and slide the wedge end of your scion into the cut until the cambium are aligned and the scion is firmly seated. Make a long, shallow cut in your stalk branch in order to expose the cambium layer. Make 1 notch cut on either side. Take 2 pieces of scion wood and make long sloping cuts with tongues, just like with whip and tongue grafts. Fit the tongue of the first scion inside the notch of the stalk branch so that the outside layer of cambium is aligned. If you have extra length on your scion, an additional cut on your stalk branch to expose extra cambium can help ensure a successful graft. Repeat the process on the other side of the stalk branch with your second scion. Here we're demonstrating bark grafting. While this is a very effective technique, it must be done during a narrow window in the season when the bark is slipping, meaning the bark can easily be peeled away from the stalk branch without damage.
Make a shallow vertical cut into your stock branch, just deep enough to pass through the cambium into the wood of the branch. Make a wedge cut in your scion. Peel back the bark just enough so you can insert the scion to a snug fit. Now that we've demonstrated various grafting techniques, we're going to show you how to secure your grafts. Electrical tape is a great option. It's easy to find and inexpensive. It also stretches as the plant grows, which is important to prevent girdling of the grafted branches. Another benefit of electrical tape is that it comes in bright colors, making it easy to identify your grafts in the orchard. Wrap your graft completely to secure it, making sure to leave the top edge of the stock branch uncovered to ensure proper formation of callus wood. Parafilm is another viable alternative. While a bit more expensive than electrical tape, this material is stretchable and it will stick without the use of an adhesive, making it easy to work with when wrapping new grafts. It's important to stretch this material while you wrap, ensuring that enough wraps are made to secure the graft. Rubber bands are another option. This inexpensive material can serve to secure the graft, but it doesn't form a tight seal like the other options previously mentioned, making it important to come back with a proper sealant afterwards. Once your grafts are secured, the next step is to apply a grafting sealant. The purpose of grafting sealants are to keep moisture in while preventing outside moisture, pests, and diseases from getting into your graft. Grafting sealants can come in waxes, paints, or tars. It's important to cover your graft completely, as well as any other cuts that are made during the process, such as the cut tips of your scions or stock branches. It's often a good idea to come back once the material has dried to check for uncovered portions and apply a second coat as needed. If you have multiple scions on the same stock branch, the practice of intertwining or braiding your scions is utilized to add structural stability as your scion heals. Due to the way these grafts are made, there's a greater likelihood of them breaking if force is applied outward from the center of the stock branch. This can be caused by strong winds or birds landing on the scion. Over time, these scions will graft to themselves, fusing cambium from one scion to another at points of contact.
Thank you very much for watching this video. Please remember to go back and check out the additional resources that we have available on this page. And thank you again to all of our partners involved in this project. We couldn't have done this without them. And those partners include UMass Cooperative Extension, the New Hampshire Department of Ag, Markets, and Food, our host farm here, Poverty Lane Orchards in Lebanon, our UNH Extension team that's participated to make this workshop possible, and all of the growers that have been involved in this research getting us to this point. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
That was great. Thanks, Jeremy.
All right, sure. Thanks. You all got the first screening before that goes live on YouTube today. So hope you enjoyed it, and I'd love to hear any feedback if you want to contact me directly. Future videos you'd like to see us make. And thanks for all the great comments there. Appreciate it, you all. It was a lot of fun to make, and we'd like to do more of them. So let us know what you could use.
Wonderful. So we do have a few minutes for questions. If anybody has any last minute questions, go ahead and pop those into the chat.
Jaime, we do have some questions coming in now. We have a question: is timing for stone fruit the same as for apples?
It will be at the chalk split stage, which I think happens before apple.
So we have another: is kaolin clay effective against Plum Curculio?
Kaolin clay will be effective at repelling Plum Curculios, but it's not going to kill them. So as soon as you have rainfall, if that was the question, kaolin clay surround?
Yep.
Okay. So if you have a rainfall, then you have to reapply kaolin clay, but Plum Curculios have a high pressure to oviposit, so eventually they are going to get to the fruits, unless you apply kaolin clay frequently.
All right, we do have a follow-up on that. Would you suggest using surround only on perimeter rows twos or throughout the orchard?
I will apply surround to the entire orchard.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And then do you have the number of sprays and the rates for your trials comparing the two products against each other, Vertiprin and Avant?
Yeah, for that, I would like to refer to a fruit notes article, which I can make available to everyone.
Great,
can
and
tell
I'll
you what
go
the
ahead
rate-
and distribute that out to New York growers as well. Thank you. We have a question for you, Jaime. Can a trap tree with pyrethrin spray be used in an organic orchard? Will this provide enough reduction in feeding damage to other unsprayed trees?
Yes, I will say that pyrethrins are it will be the most effective way of controlling Plum Curculio in an organic orchard. That will be pyganic. But there is a second material, which is Acera. I will type in the chat. Acera insecticide is for organic production, and it combines two active ingredients, pyrethrins and neem azadirachtin. So these two materials working together seems to be better than pyganic, but the cost is also a consideration because Acera you have to buy a gallon and it's pretty expensive. With pyganic, you can buy smaller amounts. So the short answer is yes, you can use pyganic, but you can also use Acera.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jaime. We had a question. Is the idea of the multi-cultivar grafted tree that less valuable apples will take the damage?
The less valuable apple will take the damage. I would say your block could have highly valuable apples, the cash crop, but the grafted trees, you will have to sacrifice some of the fruit. So I am assuming that these grafted trees will also have high value apples, for example. But the idea is that you are grafting very attractive cultivars. You are trying to pull the pest away from the other trees. So when it comes to value, I would say the apples will become damaged. You can see 40% injury, for example, 20% on average. So you're going to have fewer apples healthy in the grafted trees. So a portion of that fruit will have to be sacrificed.
All right, thanks, Jaime. We had one more question. Why wasn't Red Astrachan attractive at the second site? Do you have any idea why you saw that difference between sites?
Well, there was one slide that showed that actually there was no fruit. So I don't know if there was something there that I thought that made a person make this comment, but just go here. There is no value here because there is, oh, I'm not sharing anymore. Let me just go there. So in this slide, what you see, I am not providing any value because there is no fruit. Here, 70% injury. And the last one, it was 50% injury. So Red Astrachan is very attractive. What happened is that in this particular orchard niche way, there was no fruit. So that's
All
why
right.
I cannot show any value of injury.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for the clarification. Let's see, we have one more follow-up question. How many multi-grafted trees would you need for 1 hectare?
We have been discussing that it could be 3, it could be 4. I would say it depends on the shape, it depends on what is outside the orchard, the habitat. It could be 3 or 4.
And is that per acre or per hectare?
I would say per acre.
Okay. All right, thank you. That looks like all the questions for now. Thanks.
And just to clarify on the Red Astrachan there, the reason there was no fruit, right, Jaime, was just that those were young grafts and they hadn't been there long enough to produce fruit.
Yeah.
And so that's something we expect to see early on for the first couple of years before those grafts start to actually produce and have been there long enough to produce flower buds and fruit.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you.
Jaime, just wondering if you want to discuss a little bit more about how long it takes for the grafted trees to really start producing fruit and having an effect for your program there?
Yes. So let's say in the spring of this year, there is going to be new grafted trees. Nothing happens. 2022, 23, for sure, it's just spraying the same way, etc. In 2024, the growers will continue to spray, but we're going to be visiting the orchards and collecting some data. Are you getting more injury in those grafted branches compared to the non-grafted trees, etc.? But the sprays continue. So nothing changes, and that's why it's a low risk project, because it depends on the shape and size of the block. If we find that there is a spillover effect and Plum Curculio injuries maybe going in places where we don't want, let's say it's not working, well, the grower can remove the branches and just come back to the previous tree. But if we show that the branches are very attractive in 2 years, 3 years, then that could possibly help with changing the management of the block, but it's not going to happen overnight. At least 3 years, I think.
And Jaime, do you want to also comment on pH and insecticide activity?
Yes, what I was just typing is that in Avant Evo and Imidan, yes, if you have alkaline water, pH 6 or higher, there may be a negative effect on the efficacy of the insecticide. But as I was checking Verde Prin, I couldn't find any statement on the effect of pH. So I will say for most insecticides, maybe there is an effect of pH, but at least in some, there may not be a statement or there may not be an effect. So Verde Prin doesn't say anything about pH.
So we had the question, would planting entire sentinel trees be as effective as having the grafts? I'm thinking about the potential of pruning, removing the grafted branches over the long-term and high-density blocks. So I guess particularly for new orchards, as far as planting full trees of those attractive varieties as opposed to grafting branches over to them?
I think it's possible. We have been working with existing blocks, but I think if a person is planning to have a new block, they could select to have in some areas 1 or 2 trees of different cultivars. And something I didn't mention is that Stephen Wood from New Hampshire, he really wants to control Plum Curculio. So what he's doing, he's also planting plum trees 2 in the same trees which are grafted, because he really wants to bring Plum Curculio to those trees. So plum trees is not going to be perhaps acceptable by every grower, but at least can be considered having the plum, the original, the native tree, which is the Plum Curculio, planted next to the grafted tree.
All right, thanks, Jaime. As a follow-up question, are there any, I mean, out of those different varieties that you had on your trees, which ones are you going to be promoting for your region as far as ones that are very attractive from what you've seen so far?
I would say there are 4. There is 3 or 4 that I would really like to include every time. And those 4 are Red Astrachan, number 1, Yellow Transparent, number 2, Wickson, number 3, because Wickson is also very attractive to apple maggot fly. So I just posted a message in the text box. So, and then the 4th one, it could be Liberty or Ginger Gold. But some growers are concerned about the fire blight susceptibility of some cultivars. And I think Ginger Gold may be susceptible to fire blight if the block is organic. It will be problematic. But I would say, I think it's going to be easier to discard. At this moment, Dabinet is not showing to be good. So I will continue with Dabinet, just giving a chance to perform. But I think Dabinet is going to be one that could be discarded. But the top 4 is Red Astrachan, Liberty, Yellow Transparent, and Wickson.
All right, thank you, Jaime. We had a question on the practical side of grafting. What's a good graft sealant? Can cling wrap be used? Any suggestions, Jeremy?
Yeah, so kind of depending on the type of grafting you're doing, if you're doing bench grafting, then certainly you could use something like cling wrap. You know, people use bread bags cut into strips and wrap tightly around. I like Parafilm when bench grafting because it stretches. And the idea is that we want to seal in moisture and prevent those grafts from drying out. And then when we're grafting and doing, say, a cleft graft or something like that, then we're usually coming back with something like the green flexible, it's Gichel's grafting wax. It's really pliable. It's almost like Play-Doh that you can basically smear into those splits that you would make for something like cleft grafting. Or you've got the yellow paint-on grafting sealant that is also pretty popular. Electrical tape is another key part of that. And you'll see some of this shown in the video when we play that next as well.
All right, thanks, Jeremy. We had a question. If I remember right, there were no special insecticide applications on the grafted trees. So the damage in this project may be higher than it would be if growers were spraying in response to seeing damaged fruit. Is that correct, Jaime?
Every single grafted tree was sprayed. So the whole block, the management doesn't change. So the grafted trees, non-grafted trees, everything gets sprayed by growers. So the injury is in the spite of the sprays.
Okay, thank you, Jaime.
I'd like to say thank you to Jeremy and Jaime for joining us today. We always appreciate your contributions, and it was very interesting. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us. And I'll distribute the link to the various, to Extension in all the states so that they can send it out to folks.
Great, thanks. Oh, and one quick reminder. So we did switch dates on 2 of our sessions. So today was originally scheduled as an herbicide talk. That talk is now going to be held on March 29th, just to remind you of that. And then next week, as I mentioned before, will be our Northeast cider apple production session. See you all later.
Thank you.